Welcome Year 11s to this video about plant transport systems and the transpiration stream. So let's begin by talking about the actual plant transport system. The plant transport system is made out of two major vessels. This includes the xylem, which you see here, and the phloem, which we'll be talking about later. So let's start off by actually talking about the structure of the xylem. So the xylem is made out of dead cells whose inner cell walls, which might have linked over here, have disintegrated, creating a long hollow tube. So hollow. The outside walls of the xylem are thickened with a substance called lignin. All of this helps support its role in transporting water from the roots to the shoots, so in one direction only. The xylem also transports minerals, so these include any minerals that are soluble in water. It is very common to find an exam question asking you to compare and contrast the xylem and the phloem. Here, the main key points you would want to talk about are the dead cells, the fact that it's completely hollow, and that it transports water. Let's move on to the phloem, which is the other main transport system in the plant. Unlike the xylem, the phloem is made out of living cells. It is also not completely hollow. Instead, it forms a tube with sieve plates in between. Furthermore, the cell walls interlink with each other so they don't disintegrate, and also it's important to note that these cells that make up the phloem are incapable of living on their own, hence they have companion cells. Companion cells store the function of the nucleus within themselves because these don't have enough space for nuclei. It is also important to note that they transport different substances. So the phloem transports things like sugars and other assimilates like amino acids. It's also important to note the direction of flow of substances. Unlike the xylem, where it could only go in one direction, in the phloem, substances can go in two directions. They can go from the roots to the shoots, from the shoots to the roots. This is because, in places like the roots, photosynthesis is unable to happen. Therefore, they rely on sugars to be transported down the phloem from the leaves to be able to carry out respiration. Sugars may need to travel up the phloem to move from being stored as tubers into being used for growth, in places like the meristem. Now, let's talk about how these systems provide support to the plant. In this case, we're talking about structural support. So, within the stems themselves, they line the outer part of the stems. So let me just draw that in brown. They line the outer part of the stems, like that, to make almost like a cylindrical structure that keeps the plant upright. However, in the leaves and the roots, they line the center parts of the organ. In the leaf, this means that it provides structure in the middle, allowing the outsides to droop. And in the roots, it makes sure that the vascular bundles act as anchors for the plant, making sure that it doesn't sway away in the wind. Now, let's talk about the transpiration stream. So what exactly is the transpiration stream? The transpiration stream refers to the movement of water from the roots to the shoots in one direction via the xylem. So we can imagine this as a tiny water droplet over here. This water droplet would interact with the root hair cells and diffuse into the cell. The water droplet would then move from cell to cell all along until it reaches the outer part of the xylem. It then diffuses across the membrane to go up the xylem and to the leaves. When the water reaches the leaves, it is absorbed by neighboring cells or is released into gaps between leaf cells. If the guard cells are open, for example, open for photosynthesis, water is allowed to drip off and fall or evaporate into the surroundings. To prevent the uncontrolled water loss, unlike the bottom, the top layer of the leaf has a waxy cuticle. So this waxy cuticle ensures that no water is lost from the top of the leaf, where it's more exposed to the sun. So, how exactly does water move up the leaf? So water has cohesive properties and high surface tension. This means it clings to the walls of the xylem and almost pulls its way up. It almost creates a siphon effect, which you may have studied before. So, how do plants balance the need for water and gas exchange? Well, they do this by regulating when they open their stomata, which you might have learned before. So plants are less likely to photosynthesize at night so that they don't lose water. Now let's move on to actually investigating transpiration. You would have probably seen one of these before. This is something called a potometer. This diagram is taken straight from the textbook and is normally something you would see in your exam. Now, let me just walk you through how a potometer actually works. The potometer relies on the siphon effect we talked about earlier. So, we attach a shoot of the specimen we're trying to investigate and place it into the top part of the potometer, making sure it's sealed with a rubber bung so that no excess water can evaporate otherwise. There should be no air bubbles at the top, so that we can maximize the surface area that the stem has to interact with the water. So over time, we should notice that the water is taken up by the leaf and deposited into the surrounding air. This would mean that I would siphon up water. Let's just select a color. It would siphon up water going that way, dragging the air bubble that we're measuring along the potometer. The aim is to measure how far the air bubble goes in a given amount of time. Then we would repeat this experiment, talking about repeatability, reliability, accuracy, and all of that, by releasing the water in this reservoir. This reservoir would push water only this way because this area is already full. We would keep on doing this till the bubble reaches the beginning of the scale. The beaker of water is supposed to replace any water lost. Well, now there are several ways of actually investigating, several factors that we can change to investigate transpiration. So let's talk about it by moving to this leaf diagram I have over here. Now let's pretend there's a lot of sunlight. If there's a lot of sunlight, the plant knows that it is the perfect opportunity to undergo photosynthesis. This means that the guard cells will open, so let's create little gaps, and the water will flow out. This means you would predict a graph somewhat like this when it comes to light intensity. Now, let's talk about temperature. Increasing the temperature of the surroundings means that water is more likely to evaporate quickly. So let's draw several arrows to represent this. Now, let's think about humidity. How do you think humidity affects transpiration? Well, humidity refers to the amount of water particles that are already in the air. Now, we know about concentration gradients. We know that if there is a steeper concentration gradient between the leaf and the outside surroundings, water is more likely to move out of the plant. However, if there is already water particles present in the air, this concentration gradient is decreased. This means that the rate of loss of water would also decrease. And we can expect a graph somewhat like this. Now, let's talk about air movement. The movement of air is somewhat similar to the movement of blood in your alveoli. We know that the alveoli need to have a constant replenishment of blood so that it can maintain a concentration gradient. The same is true with water. Now, if there was a strong wind pushing water molecules across that have diffused out of the plant, like that, they would slowly move away until there's none left. If there are fewer water particles on the outside, this increases the concentration gradient and hence increases the rate of transpiration. Therefore, you would expect to see a graph somewhat like this. Now that we've covered all the factors affecting transpiration, the way transpiration actually works, and the way plants actually transport substances around the system, we are now capable to go and attempt PMT questions. Please try and attempt PMT questions labeled plant transport systems. Thank you.